Okay, welcome back for Tuesday. I apologize, I got cut off right in the middle of epiphyseal union description yesterday. Technological glitch that, is a good ending point anyway. You don't want more than 25 minutes of me yammering. Today's interesting lecture will pick up where we left off, and I'll get into some of the specifics. We're going to learn a few bone names as we go, and I promise there will be a lot of repetition in terms of skeletal anatomy throughout this whole unit. There's somewhere in the realm of 56 slides or more, a few activities that you'll be able to do, and you will learn probably half of all of the bones in the body, at least the major bones. And it's something you can keep with you in your brains really forever. It's one of those valuable aspects of this course that can last you a lifetime of Jeopardy, Final Jeopardy questions. So anyway, enough of that. So I believe I left off describing the epiphyseal unions, the function of what a growth plate is, and the occurrence of a break therein. To pick back up right about there, I know that I did not get a chance to describe one of the major misconceptions about epiphyseal unions, i.e. growth plates. One of the major misconceptions about a growth plate is that if you sustain an injury to a growth plate, that will stunt the growth of that bone. Unequivocally false. Absolutely untrue. I don't know if you've ever heard it before. I hope you haven't, but now you have, and it's untrue. The growth plates are exactly as their name implies. They're where the rapid elongation of long bones occur. The growth plate is where you have a cartilaginous region that allows for the replication of new cells through mitosis to elongate your bones. So it's no surprise that they are found near the ends of your long bones. Your long bones grow from the ends. So, much like an apical stem of a plant, it grows from the top, and that new green tissue is where it's all happening. And if you notice that if you're looking at a plant, a shrub in your yard that has new growth on it, that new green growth is very flexible compared to the older, more hardened xylem, mature wood area of a plant. Same idea with the bones. The bones are somewhat pliable at the epiphyseal unions. I did talk about the toddler falling down the stairs. I remember that. Anyway, so epiphyseal union, when broken, can be easily repaired simply resetting it, putting the slid out head of the femur, say, off the neck, realigning it and immobilizing it. You will get very rapid healing, oftentimes with little to no long-term repercussions. My yard guy has arrived, so you may hear some background noise. I'll try to keep my volume up high enough to counteract that. Anyway, so your epiphyseal union, your growth plate at the end of all of your bones, they ossify. That cartilaginous tissue turns into the calcium phosphorus hardened tissue at measurable rates. So by studying the condition of an epiphyseal union post-mortem will give you a reasonable determinant of the age bracket that the person reached prior to dying. So there are some bone density issues as well, and that's something I would like to bring up. It's not mentioned here in your slides, but it is a valuable tool in determining relative age upon death of a bone. As you grow, your bones are quite dense in the beginning. And as you're adding more mass to your skeleton and the rest of your body through rapid growth of your childhood to early adulthood, you're packing on a lot of mass. And this is increasing the density. The better your diet is, the better your exposure to sunlight for vitamin D, better your intake of calcium and phosphorus in a balance are, the stronger your bones will become. We see degradation in the older generation in something called osteoporosis. Osteo is bone, porosis is holes, porous bones. The bone density decreases significantly in folks after they have reached their full capacity in terms of growth. And there are some hormonal factors that play a role, and there are some dietary factors that play a role in the rate at which this osteoporosis will set in and to the degree to which osteoporosis will affect bone density. So what's I think is important always to mention to my forensics classes is because of your age, you are at the late stage of being able to increase the density of your bones. You cannot continue to increase the density much later than the age of 25 or so. So it's very important that you build up a foundation based on dietary habits, exercise habits, and sun exposure, healthy sun exposure, to pack on as much density in your bones as you can, because from there on out, your function of the skeleton as a mineral sink becomes a primary action of the skeleton. What I mean by mineral sink, our metabolism and our regular function, our homeostatic balance in our body, and our nervous function requires the transmission of nerve impulses in the presence of a salt bridge. Electric conductivity. Electric shock does not pass, electric current does not pass well through fresh water. But you put salt in that water and you get a very faster, more efficient highway of electrical transfer. Your nervous function, your neurons firing information to keep your heart beating, to tell you to breathe, to move, anything that requires nervous response, be it voluntary or involuntary, requires electric conductivity. And those every neuron firing, every impulse requires a little bit of calcium, a little bit. But when you think about how many neurons you have, and it's in the billions, you think about how many neurons fire every moment of every day, you're talking about a considerable amount of calcium being used. Now, the bulk of your calcium that you use in neural impulsing, or impulses, is found in your diet. When you take in calcium, a lot of it is used not for skeletal structure, but for metabolic function, which is kind of cool. But when you are not taking in enough calcium at any given time, your body goes to its reserves and pulls calcium atom by atom out of your skeletal system. So the fact that we have hormonal balances that fluctuate as we mature influences the docking of calcium into your skeleton. So although there are all sorts of pharmaceuticals and supplements that are targeted towards the older generation, Boniva, keep your bones healthy and stuff, those are not really effective at slowing down or fixing, and certainly not fixing, osteoporosis. Grandma's bones are not going to get stronger if she takes Centrum Silver or Boniva, simply because her skeleton no longer has the ability, based on hormonal levels, of docking calcium into that mineral sink. She is constantly drawing calcium out of her diet and her reserve, her skeleton, for every neural impulse that goes on in her body. So, what's very important to you guys as you're young, build up that stockpile, fill up that mineral sink as much as you can now, because you can't add more to it later. You just can't. So, having a diet high in calcium, along with a balance of vitamin E, because calcium will not dock, of vitamin D, calcium will not dock into your skeleton unless it's in the presence of the right level of vitamin D. If you ever notice milk, imaginary milk here, if you ever notice milk, it says vitamin D milk on it, or oftentimes a great source of calcium. Those two, calcium and vitamin D, lock together into your skeleton. Your body will produce vitamin D by the exposure to ultraviolet radiation. That's why people in the sun not only feel better because of another chemical response to ultraviolet radiation, the vitamin D, vitamin D3 specifically, helps dock calcium into your skeleton. Another side note related to that is this is why a lot of captive tropical lizards don't do well in captivity unless they have the right amount of ultraviolet radiation exposure. A lot of people get iguanas, they grow real fast, real big, but then they end up getting all like soft and floppy. It's called spongy bone disorder, because they're not getting natural sunlight that they would normally be bathed in every day in the tropics. They're in a cage under a fluorescent light. So it's that wavelength of ultraviolet light that produces vitamin D3 in your system and allows for the docking of calcium. Kind of cool. Totally not in the slideshow, but I think it's valuable information. Once you're about 25 and all of your ossification has occurred, your epiphyseal unions, your growth plates have completely converted from cartilage to calcium phosphorus, you're done. You can't really do much to add to your calcium docking. This again is why it's much a faster healing process when a young person breaks a bone versus when an older person does. Young people break a bone, and it's 4 to 6 weeks and you're pretty well 100% healed. Somebody like me breaks a bone, it's 8 to 16 weeks, usually with the addition of a pin and immobility. And someone even older than me, God forbid, breaks a bone, it's even longer of a process, and in some cases they never truly heal well. So that's kind of cool. Ooh, something else worth mentioning. Skip it. Maybe I'll get back to it. Yeah, I'll get back to it. All right, so the next bullet down is measurement. General terminology, our long bones get longer as we grow. So if a anthropologist is presented with a short long bone, the likelihood of that person who had that short long bone was probably younger, than someone with a longer one. Generality. There are more precise factors that we use in measurement, but I'm going to hold off on the description until the next maybe third slide from now or second slide from now, because there are some specifics I'd like to delve into that are somewhat spelled out for you as well. So measurement is another ballparker in terms of age. Clearly a toddler's femur is going to differ significantly from an adult male's femur in length. So we'll get back to that more specifics. If you click to the next slide, I left off the title. It should be sexual or sex determination, not sexual. Sex determination. The determination of whether we are biologically male or biologically female. And most of you are probably familiar already with there are differences skeletally in the pelvis primarily. And I'll describe some of those differences now, But there are also some other bones that have or express sexual dimorphism, differences between the male and the female biological sex determinant. Starting with the pelvis, and I'll have more detailed pelvic diagrams and such in further slides. But starting with the pelvis, our main girdle that holds our legs to our trunk, it's a complex of bones made up of 3 sets, an ilium and ischium on the right side and an ilium and ischium on the left side, and fused in the back with your sacrum. And the front of the ilium ischium complex of left and right come together to form the pubic symphysis. All right? And I talked about the pubic symphysis in the previous lesson. And we're going to look at some of those differences regarding the pubic bone and pubic arch right now. So, the difference between a male pelvis and a female pelvis, most strikingly obvious, is that pubic bone angle. If you can see the triangle that the bottom of my pinkies are making, bloop, my neck's in it now. On a male skeleton, that triangle is an acute triangle. Acute. On a female, it's more obtuse. A female pelvis has a wider pubic or pelvic arch. That frontal pubic bone symphysis is more acute in the male, more obtuse in the female. Male, female, male, female. All right, so the reason why we have that width in the female pelvis, not surprising, the female pelvis has to aid in childbirth. The male pelvis does not. So for a baby to, come flying out there in childbirth, you're going to want as much clearance from the bones as possible. A male pelvis, there is not enough space for your average size baby to come out. So no matter how badly a man wants to give birth, and I don't know how badly that is, they can't. They physically can't, even if they had all of the right organs. That pubic bone at this angle won't allow for the passage of a human being. Okay, so pelvic width in the female, boop. Pelvic width in the male, burp, beep, bump. Okay, major difference. And you can determine that even if you just have one side of the pelvis. Looking at the pubic bone on one side, you can tell what angle it creates. So that's pretty good. And all right, it really blows that I don't have an actual pelvis to show you because school's closed. But an actual pelvis, you're looking at the front, right? If we turn it sideways and you put your hands on your ilium, like if you're standing up, with your hands on your hips, put your hands on your hips. When you put your hands on your hips and you can feel those bones up there, those are the top of your ilium, the top of part of your pelvic complex. It's an arch. You follow it down and then you start to get into the meat of your lower back and gluteum. And underneath all of that muscle and tissue, there is a notch called the pelvic notch. And I do have some pictures of it in future slides. But the pelvic notch, just like the pubic arch, female, male, the pelvic notch, male, female. Male is an acute notch, female is more obtuse, or closer to 90 at least. So we're looking at that very easy dimorphic trait. All right, so that's pretty cool. The next, we'll get away from the pelvis for now. There's more stuff on the pelvis later. We'll get back to skull. Skull is made up of your cranium and your facial bones. Together, cranial facial bones make up your skull. Frontal bone, parietal bones, temporal bones, and occipital bone. The occipital bone is the one in the back. The occipital bone is dimorphic between male and female. The male occipital bone, in this case, opposite of the pelvic rules, The male occipital bone is wider. The female's is more narrow. Male occipital bone, female occipital bone. It fits right in the back of your skull. Very easy to see in a skull. And you can feel your occipital bone regardless of your hairdo. Mine's super easy, but most of yours is a little obstructive. But you feel on the back of your head, both male students and female students, you can feel there's a bump back there. That is a normal bump, and that bump is a condyle. It's your occipital condyle. It's a bump on the back of your skull. It protrudes a bit more in male occipital bones than it does in females. You can feel it, and there's nothing wrong with you as a female if you can feel that bump, because both males and females have it. It's just more pronounced in a male's occipital bone. So, when someone gives you consent of the opposite sex to feel their occipital bone, compare it to yours and see if I'm lying. I'm probably not. Anyway, so that occipital bone, when you remove all of the tissue and it's, a skeletal remain, the male occipital bone is actually quite sharp, or the occipital condyle, that little point that comes out, quite sharp, whereas a female is a little smoother. And you can feel that on actual bones. And you may be able to feel that given, your person that let you feel theirs and you felt yours and vice versa and such. You may be able to feel it's rougher on a male than it is on a female. So, regardless of lower body anatomy, just the back of the skull tells you whether this skull belonged to a male or to a female. All right. There are some other differences in sexual dimorphism that we'll talk about down the road. All right. And I'm gonna give you this last slide of race determination because we're at 22 minutes right now, and I gotta stop it at 25. Otherwise, there's some weird stuff. Anyway, race determination. One thing worth noting is that because of globalization and, thank goodness, the progression of society, races are not as compartmentalized as they used to be based on geographic isolation. Racial or interracial relationships are more and more common simply because of our global transport, the migration and immigration of different groups of people, and social norms. So, woohoo for interracial relationships. But if these interracial relationships lead to offspring, you're starting to create sort of hybridized characteristics. So race determination with exact measurable rules is becoming less and less compartmentalized. But there still are a few generalities. One, in the Afracoid race, someone with very recent Afracoid descent, the nasal opening is a bit wider than that found in the same region, the nasal opening of a Caucasoid or a Mongoloid. Mongoloid is that of Asian descent. Caucasoid is that of the Caucasian mountain range, Russia, white Caucasians. And Africoid is that of black folks that originated most recently from Africa. So it's a little bit wider in the Africoids, a little more narrow in Caucasoids, and even more narrow in Mongoloids. The frontal bone, which is the opposite of your occipital bone, the frontal bone, forehead bone, in my case, like 9 head, Rihanna's case, 5 head, but this frontal bone is set back a little further in some Africoid skulls. And that is starting to vary considerably as a result of migration and gene pool deepening. So the last aspect of racial determination is in the eye sockets. And we find Mongoloid eye sockets, those of Asian descent, are more rounded than any of the other major race categories. I'm going to stop it at this point. That's the end of race determination and the end of Tuesday's super informative lecture. We'll get back to more of this Wednesday. All right? Bye for now. Hope you learned something.